Americans for Fair Taxation presents the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, president of Americans for Fair Taxation, and recorded by Bob Paxton, a volunteer with the Florida FAIRtax Educational Association. And now, this week's Chairman's Report.
Hello, I'm Bob Paxton with the AFFT Chairman's Report for Friday, October 20th, 2023. How to collect taxes from the super wealthy. An article published by truthout.org was entitled, Wealthy Americans Failed to Pay $65.7 billion in Taxes from 2017 to 2020. Here are some of the points made in that article. U.S. Senator Ron Wyden has called on the Internal Revenue Service to crack down on particularly brazen high-income tax cheats. Wyden says that more than 1.4 million wealthy Americans still have not filed their taxes for 2017 through 2020, with a total amount owed to the federal government reaching a whopping $65.7 billion. Now, nearly 1,000 people who earn $1 million a year or more have yet to file their tax returns. But Wyden wrote that the most alarming revelation in the data provided to his committee by the IRS was the extraordinary amount of unpaid taxes owed by a small subset of ultra-wealthy non-filers, with the 2,000 highest-earning tax dodgers currently owing $923 million. These high earners, said Wyden, have access to professional advisors and are well aware of their filing obligations with the IRS, but they continue to withhold hundreds of millions of dollars that could support food aid, housing assistance, public health efforts, and other federal programs. With tax evasion from previous years still affecting federal coffers, Wyden told IRS Commissioner Werfel in his letter that the IRS should initiate enforcement actions against every single millionaire non-filer as part of its ongoing effort to use Inflation Reduction Act funding to restore fairness in tax compliance. I also urge the IRS to utilize the enforcement tools available to it for instances of willful millionaire non-filers, he added, including referrals to the Department of Justice for civil or criminal prosecution, liens, and levies. Now, of course, we don't know how much of this $65.7 billion owed is not in dispute by the taxpayers with the IRS appellate branch or is being disputed by the taxpayer in the tax courts. And we all know that just because the IRS says that a certain amount of federal income tax is owed, that doesn't necessarily mean, and it often doesn't, that the figures they quote are correct. Unlike the rest of us, the wealthy have the resources to dispute assessments by the IRS in court, and they often do so. In conclusion, yes, it's true that some billionaires only paid $750 in federal income taxes. It's also true that other wealthy people paid a lower percentage of their income in taxes than most of the rest of us do. However, these wealthy people are not doing anything illegal. The truth is, the wealthy have access to the best income tax advisors, and they don't need to cheat in order to reduce their federal income tax liability. Remember, the wealthy have the means to make large contributions to members of Congress who determine the federal income tax policy. Consequently, the Internal Revenue Code is absolutely loaded with special provisions that most people don't even know exist. These bought and paid for special provisions allow wealthy people to reduce their tax liability legally. This explains why many of the ultra-wealthy are not advocating for the fair tax. They know that when everyone is treated equally, they'll pay a lot more in federal taxes. Just imagine what a billionaire pays a month just for food and dining. Now, they don't go to McDonald's or they don't go to a buffet either. Nope, they go to a restaurant where the bill for a meal for two is going to be $250 or more. And they don't purchase clothes at regular department stores, and they don't furnish their several homes at IKEA. Now, a billionaire who spends $50,000 a month above the poverty level will pay $15,000 a month in fair tax. That's $150,000 a year. You won't find very many fair tax supporters among those who feel like it's other people, not them, who should be paying federal taxes. Now, Senator Wyden and many of the people screaming the loudest about the wealthy not paying their fair share of federal income taxes know that there is a simple and effective solution: the fair tax. So why won't they support it? Well, the answer to that's simple. Senator Wyden and most of D.C. know that the income tax is a terrible system for funding the government. However, it's a wonderful system for giving politicians control over the population and for providing them with nearly unlimited amounts of money they can use to fund their campaigns. All Senator Wyden has to do is threaten to eliminate a tax break for a special group, like the wealthy. The campaign contributions pour into him and others, and this happens in both parties. What other reason could there be? D.C. hates that the fair tax will be enforced by the states, not the IRS, not by D.C. bureaucrats. Members of Congress hate that they won't be able to get huge contributions by threatening to eliminate a tax break for wealthy taxpayers. The fair tax transfers power from Congress and the bureaucrats to the people. We, not D.C., will decide how much federal tax we pay. Now, only businesses or people who sell new retail goods or provide retail services will have to collect the fair tax and remit it to the government. Now, since less than 10% of the retailers account for 90% of retail purchases, there will be much less opportunity for evasion. So, why would D.C. pass the fair tax and give up this almost unlimited source of donations? Well, they won't, at least not voluntarily. The only way they will is if the rest of us demand it. Isn't it time to end this ludicrous tax collection system and the IRS along with it? There's going to be a vote on the fair tax in the House of Representatives. The elites didn't want it, but it was forced on them. So we now have the opportunity to force all members of the House to show where they stand. They can vote for the president income payroll tax system, or they can vote for the fair tax. They can support the corrupt income tax in the IRS, or they can vote to eliminate it. It can't be any simpler than that. They can hide the true cost of their government, or they can pass the fair tax and show everyone the true cost of government on every retail receipt. Finally, they can support the largest transfer of power from the government to the people, the fair tax, or they can vote against it. Now, if members think the fair tax needs to be amended to address a problem, then they can propose that change. Don't let them reject the entire bill because it has a perceived flaw that can be easily addressed. Please stand with us and demand that your representatives support a much fairer, much simpler, and much more efficient way to fund the government, the fair tax. The fair tax doesn't pick winners and losers. Because it taxes spending, not earnings, the fair tax lets everyone save for their retirement tax-free. The fair tax will allow us to take back control. The income payroll tax system is broken. It's no longer working. We can't repair it, but we can replace it with the fair tax. Join us and take back control of our country and our lives, not with bullets, but with the elimination of one of the biggest threats to our liberty and economic prosperity, the income payroll tax. We should all remember Edmund Burke's warning that applies to our efforts to take back control. Nobody made a greater mistake than he who did nothing because he could only do a little. We should also remember this quote from George Orwell's 1984, which, if we do nothing, may foretell your and your children's future. If you want to picture the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. So what can each of us do? We can write letters and make calls to our elected representatives and attend Zoom town hall meetings demanding that if they really want to allow Americans to take back control, the first step is to eliminate the income payroll tax system and enact the fair tax. Take back control. Help us pass the fair tax. Help us bring about real tax reform and stop future IRS abuses. By contributing or investing $10.40 a month, you help provide a financial base to Americans for fair taxation. Now, if you can make larger contributions/investments, these will be used not for salaries, as we're all volunteers, but for the needed updates to our economic studies, which will be vital for all future years. Please go to FAIRtax.org and invest in AFFT. It's an investment in your and your family's future.
This has been the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, President of Americans for Fair Taxation. Check back every week for news and information about the fair tax, and learn why the fair tax should replace our antiquated federal income tax system. If you'd like to receive a copy of the Chairman's Report in your inbox every week, sign up at FAIRtax.org.